My name is Detective Marcus Kane, badge number 4471, Phoenix Police Department. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 months ago in the Arizona desert, and I swear on my 20-year career in law enforcement that every word is true. I've been a cop for 2 decades, worked everything from gang violence in South Phoenix to cartel operations along the Mexican border. I've seen bodies torn apart by automatic weapons, witnessed executions that would make hardened criminals sick, and investigated crimes that pushed the boundaries of human depravity. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed that October night in the Sonoran Desert. The department has classified this as a missing persons case, filed away in some dusty cabinet where it will be forgotten. They're wrong. This isn't about a missing person. This is about something that challenges everything we think we know about our place in the universe. Something that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of reality, yet does. I'm recording this testimony because I need people to know the truth before they come for me too. Because I know they're watching every move I make. I know they're listening to every conversation I have. And I know, with absolute certainty, that they are not human. The official report will tell you that DEA agent Sarah Chen disappeared while conducting surveillance on suspected drug trafficking routes. It will mention equipment failure, possible cartel involvement, and the harsh realities of desert operations. What it won't tell you is that Chen's last transmission contained sounds that no human throat could produce. It won't mention the electromagnetic anomalies that preceded her disappearance, or the physical evidence that defied every law of physics we understand. Most importantly, it won't tell you about the others. The 17 other federal agents who have vanished under identical circumstances over the past decade, all working cases that brought them too close to something they weren't supposed to see. I've been a detective long enough to recognize patterns. And this pattern terrifies me more than anything I've encountered in my career. These aren't random disappearances. They're systematic removals, carried out with precision and purpose by entities that possess technology far beyond our current capabilities. They've been operating in our desert for decades, possibly longer, conducting activities that I can only describe as harvesting operations. And now that I've seen too much, I know I'm next on their list. Agent Sarah Chen was 34 years old, a 12-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Administration with a spotless record and commendations for valor that filled half her personnel file. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighed 130 pounds, had black hair that she kept in a regulation ponytail, and brown eyes that missed nothing. Chen spoke fluent Spanish and Mandarin, held a master's degree in criminal justice from Arizona State University, and had completed advanced training in undercover operations at the D Academy in Quantico. She was, by every measure, one of the most competent federal agents I'd ever worked with. Chen had been working undercover for 8 months, infiltrating a drug trafficking organization that was using new routes through the Sonoran Desert to transport fentanyl and cocaine from Mexico into Phoenix. The operation was sophisticated, involving GPS coordinates, encrypted communications, and what appeared to be inside knowledge of Border Patrol schedules and movements. Chen's assignment was to identify the key players, map their distribution network, and gather evidence for a major takedown operation that had been planned for November. What made Chen particularly effective was her ability to blend into any environment. She could pass for a college student, a young professional, or a street-level dealer depending on what the situation required. Her undercover identity was Maria Santos, a small-time drug courier from Tucson looking to move up in the organization. She'd spent months building relationships, earning trust, and slowly working her way deeper into the network. By October, she had access to high-level meetings and was being considered for a significant promotion within the trafficking organization. Chen's handler was Special Agent Robert Torres, a 25-year D veteran who had worked with her on 3 previous operations. Torres described Chun as methodical, cautious, and absolutely reliable. In 8 months of undercover work, she had never missed a scheduled check-in, never failed to follow protocol, and never given him reason to worry about her safety. That's why when she missed her check-in on October 15th at 2100 hours, Torres immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. The last communication from Chun had come at 1847 hours that same day. She had transmitted a brief coded message, indicating that she was proceeding to coordinates that would place her 30 miles southeast of Phoenix for what she described as a routine surveillance operation. The coordinates corresponded to an area of empty desert with no roads, no structures, and no apparent reason for drug trafficking activity. When Torres tried to reach her for clarification, her radio remained silent. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail. Her GPS tracker showed her vehicle stationary at those coordinates. But there was no response to any attempts at communication. Captain Elena Rodriguez assigned me to lead the search and rescue operation at 0600 hours on October 16th. I assembled a team that included Detective Ray Morrison, a 15-year veteran with extensive desert search experience, Sergeant Lisa Park from our K-9 unit with her German Shepherd, Max, and helicopter pilot Captain James Mitchell, who had been flying search and rescue missions in Arizona for over 20 years. We also had thermal imaging equipment, ground penetrating radar, and communication gear that could operate on multiple frequencies. The desert where Chun had disappeared was familiar territory. I'd conducted searches there before, tracked fugitives through those canyons, and investigated crime scenes among those rock formations. The Sonoran Desert is unforgiving terrain, with temperatures that can kill an unprepared person in hours, and wildlife that includes rattlesnakes, scorpions, and javelinas. But it's also predictable. Water sources are limited and well-known. Shelter options are obvious to anyone with basic survival training. Escape routes follow natural corridors that funnel movement in predictable directions. We started our search at dawn, with the helicopter conducting an aerial survey, while the ground team approached Sheen's last known coordinates in 2 vehicles. The morning was clear, with unlimited visibility and calm winds. Perfect conditions for a search operation. Captain Mitchell spotted Chun's vehicle first, a black Chevrolet Suburban with government plates, abandoned near a dry riverbed approximately 28 miles southeast of Phoenix. From the air, there were no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to the vehicle's occupant. When we reached the Suburban, we found the doors open and the keys still in the ignition. The engine was cold, indicating the vehicle had been there for hours. Chun's service weapon, a Glock 19, was still in its holster on the driver's seat. Her radio was intact and functional. Her laptop computer was open on the passenger seat, displaying what appeared to be surveillance notes and photographs of individuals we later identified as members of the trafficking organization she had been investigating. Everything suggested that Chun had left the vehicle voluntarily, but there was no indication of where she had gone or why. What immediately struck me as wrong was the silence. In 20 years of conducting desert searches, I had never experienced silence like what surrounded Chin's abandoned vehicle. The desert is never truly quiet. There are always sounds, wind moving through cacti, insects buzzing, birds calling, small animals moving through brush. But in that location, there was nothing. Absolute, unnatural silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than simply lacking it. Even our own voices seemed muffled, as if the air itself was different. The forensics team arrived at 1100 hours and immediately began processing the scene. What they found challenged our understanding of what had happened to Agent Chun. The first anomaly was the footprints leading away from the vehicle. The impressions were clearly defined in the sandy soil, showing the tread pattern of Chun's regulation boots. But the depth of the impressions was wrong. They were too deep, as if made by someone weighing significantly more than Chun's 130 pounds. The stride length, however, was consistent with someone of her height and build. Crime scene photographer Detective Maria Santos documented the footprints with meticulous care, using rulers and markers to show scale and direction. The prints led north from the vehicle for approximately 200 yards, maintaining consistent depth and spacing. They passed around several large cacti, over a small ridge, and down into a shallow wash. Then, without any explanation, they simply stopped. Not faded away due to wind or weather. Not obscured by rocks or vegetation. They just ended, as if whoever had made them had vanished into thin air. The forensics team also discovered a strange residue around the vehicle. It appeared as a fine metallic dust that covered the hood, roof, and surrounding ground in a roughly circular pattern. The substance had a silvery appearance with an almost iridescent quality that seemed to shift colors depending on the angle of observation. When collected for analysis, the residue felt unusually light, almost weightless, and seemed to cling to collection tools in a way that suggested magnetic properties. Detective Santos attempted to photograph the residue, but her camera malfunctioned. Repeatedly, the digital display showed interference patterns, and several images came out completely distorted despite perfect lighting conditions. When she switched to a film camera, the photographs developed normally but showed the residue as completely black, as if it absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The substance also affected our metal detectors, causing them to emit continuous, high-pitched tones that made them unusable in the immediate area around the vehicle. Laboratory analysis of the residue would later prove inconclusive. The State Crime Lab reported that the substance contained elements not found in their reference database, with molecular structures that appeared to be artificially created rather than naturally occurring. The lab director, Dr. Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of forensic analysis, told me privately that in her entire career, she had never encountered anything like it. The substance seemed to exist in a state that was neither fully solid nor fully liquid, and it exhibited properties that contradicted several fundamental principles of chemistry. Asterisk on the third day of our search, we received a call that would change the entire direction of our investigation. Jim Hawkins, a 72-year-old rancher whose property bordered the search area, contacted our department to report something he had witnessed on the night of Chun's disappearance. Hawkins was a Vietnam veteran who had lived in Arizona for 45 years. He was known in the community as a reliable, no-nonsense individual who had assisted law enforcement on numerous occasions and had never been known to exaggerate or fabricate stories. Hawkins explained that he had been unable to sleep on the night of October 15th due to his cattle behaving strangely. The animals, normally calm and predictable, had been agitated and vocal, clustering together in the corner of their pasture farthest from the desert. Around 2,300 hours, he had gone outside to check on them when he observed 3 bright lights in the sky above the area where we would later find Chun's vehicle. The lights were unlike anything he had seen before, perfectly round, intensely bright, and moving in a formation that maintained exact spacing and coordination. What made Hawkins' account particularly compelling was his detailed description of the lights' behavior. They moved in ways that violated every principle of aerodynamics. He understood from his military experience. The lights could stop instantly from high-speed movement, change direction at 90-degree angles without any apparent deceleration, and hover motionless for extended periods before accelerating to tremendous speeds. Most disturbing of all, they produced no sound whatsoever. No engine noise, no rotor wash, no sonic booms despite their apparent velocity. Hawkins estimated that the lights remained visible for approximately 4 hours, from 2,300 hours until just before dawn. This time, they conducted what appeared to be systematic search patterns over the desert, moving back and forth in precise grids. Occasionally, all 3 lights would converge on a single location, and remained stationary for 10 to 15 minutes before resuming their search pattern. The lights disappeared just as the eastern horizon began to show the first hints of dawn. Not flying away, but simply vanishing instantaneously. When I asked Hawkins why he had waited 3 days to report what he had seen, his answer was both honest and troubling. He explained that he was afraid people would think he was losing his mind, that his age was catching up with him, or that he was seeking attention. He had spent 3 days trying to convince himself that he had imagined the entire incident, but the discovery of Chun's abandoned vehicle in the exact location where the lights had been most active made it impossible for him to remain silent. His cattle, he noted, had returned to normal behavior the morning after the lights disappeared. 4 days into our investigation, communications specialist Jennifer Walsh made a discovery that transformed our search from a missing person case into something far more complex and disturbing. Walsh had been monitoring Chun's radio frequency continuously since her disappearance, hoping to pick up any signal that might indicate her location or condition. At 14:32 hours on October 19th, she detected a faint transmission on Chun's assigned frequency that lasted approximately 30 seconds before dissolving into static. The transmission was heavily distorted and fragmented, but Walsh was certain it was Chun's voice. Using the department's audio enhancement software, she was able to clean up portions of the recording enough to make out words and phrases. What we heard sent chills through everyone in the communications room. Chun's voice, clearly under extreme stress but maintaining professional composure, was transmitting coordinates that placed her approximately 60 miles north of where we had been searching. But the coordinates were not the most disturbing aspect of the transmission. In the background, clearly audible despite the static and distortion, were other voices. These voices were not speaking English, Spanish, or any language that our linguist consultants could identify. The sounds were too precise and structured to be random noise, too complex to be natural phenomena, but too alien to be human speech. The vocalizations had a quality that seemed to bypass normal hearing and resonate directly in the listener's mind, creating an almost physical sensation of unease. Walsh ran the transmission through every enhancement program available to our department, then sent copies to the FBI's Audio Analysis Laboratory in Quantico. The federal analysis confirmed our findings but raised additional questions. The background voices exhibited acoustic properties that suggested they were not produced by human vocal cords. The frequency ranges extended both above and below normal human hearing capabilities, and the harmonic structures were unlike anything in their extensive database of recorded languages and dialects. Most troubling of all was the way the transmission ended. Chun's voice simply stopped mid-sentence, not fading away as would be expected if she was moving out of range, or if her equipment was failing. The background voices continued for several seconds after Chun's voice disappeared, then the entire transmission cut to absolute silence. No static, no interference, no gradual signal degradation. Just complete, immediate silence that suggested the transmission had been deliberately terminated, rather than naturally interrupted. Based on the coordinates from Chun's transmission, we redirected our search operation to an area 60 miles north of Phoenix, deep in the most remote section of the Sonoran Desert. This region was significantly more challenging than our original search area, characterized by deep canyons, towering rock formations, and terrain that was accessible only by helicopter or on foot. The area had no roads, no permanent water sources, and no reason for anyone to be there unless they were deliberately trying to avoid detection. As our helicopter approached the coordinates from Chun's transmission, we began experiencing equipment malfunctions that defied explanation. Our radio communications became filled with static and interference, making contact with base nearly impossible. The GPS navigation system began providing conflicting readings, showing our position as being in multiple locations simultaneously. Most concerning of all, The helicopter's instruments started displaying readings that contradicted what pilot Captain Mitchell could observe with his own eyes. Mitchell, a veteran pilot with over 10,000 hours of flight time in desert conditions, reported that his altimeter was showing variations of several hundred feet from his actual altitude. His compass was spinning randomly, unable to maintain a consistent heading. The engine temperature gauges were fluctuating wildly despite steady engine performance. He described the experience as flying through an invisible storm that affected instruments but not the aircraft itself. We were forced to land approximately 3 miles from the target coordinates and continue our approach on foot. The ground team consisted of myself, Detective Morrison, Sergeant Park with her K-9, and 2 additional officers from our search and rescue unit. We carried portable radio equipment, GPS devices, metal detectors, and enough supplies for a 2-day operation. What we didn't carry was any equipment that could have prepared us for what we were about to discover. The hike to the coordinates took us through some of the most rugged terrain in Arizona. We navigated narrow canyons where the walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, crossed areas of loose rock that required careful climbing, and traversed sections of desert where the temperature reached over 100 degrees despite the October date. Throughout the journey, Sergeant Park's dog Max displayed behavior that was completely out of character for a highly trained search animal. Max, normally eager and focused during search operations, became increasingly agitated as we approached the coordinates. He whined constantly, refused to take point as he usually did, and repeatedly tried to turn back toward our landing site. When we were within half a mile of the target location, Max began exhibiting signs of extreme distress, panting heavily, drooling excessively, and trembling despite the heat. Sergeant Park, who had worked with Max for 6 years, had never seen him display such behavior during a search operation. What we found at the coordinates from Chun's transmission challenged every assumption we had made about her disappearance, and forced us to confront possibilities that existed outside the boundaries of conventional law enforcement experience. The site was a perfect circle of dead vegetation, approximately 50 feet in diameter, located in a natural clearing surrounded by healthy desert plants and cacti. The dead zone was so precisely defined that it appeared to have been created with mathematical precision rather than natural causes. The vegetation within the circle had not withered, dried up, or decomposed in any normal sense. Instead, it appeared to have been drained of life in a way that left the physical structures intact, but completely devoid of any biological activity. Cacti that should have contained gallons of water were completely desiccated. Desert grasses that were green and healthy just outside the circle were gray and brittle within it. Even the soil itself seemed different, darker in color and denser in texture than the surrounding earth. In the exact center of the circle, we found Agent Chun's badge and radio, placed with deliberate precision on a flat rock that appeared to have been positioned specifically for that purpose. The badge was undamaged, still bearing Chun's photograph and identification number. The radio was functional, showing full battery power and proper operation of all systems. However, when we attempted to use the radio to contact our base station, we received only the same strange vocalizations we had heard in Chien's transmission. Detective Morrison attempted to photograph the scene, but his camera experienced the same malfunctions we had encountered at Chien's vehicle. Digital images showed severe distortion, while film photographs developed as completely black frames despite perfect lighting conditions. Our metal detectors were useless within the circle, producing continuous interference that made them inoperable. Even our watches stopped working properly, with digital displays showing random numbers and analog hands moving erratically. The most disturbing discovery was the complete absence of any other trace of Agent Chun. No clothing, no personal effects, no signs of struggle or violence. No indication of what had happened to her or where she might have gone. The placement of her badge and radio suggested that someone or something had deliberately left them as a message, But the meaning of that message was unclear. What was clear was that conventional explanations for Chun's disappearance were no longer adequate. Sergeant Park's dog Max refused to enter the circle under any circumstances. When she attempted to lead him into the dead zone, he planted his feet and would not move forward despite her commands and encouragement. When she tried to carry him into the circle, he became so distressed that she was forced to retreat to avoid injury. Max's behavior suggested that he was detecting something in that area that was invisible to human senses, but deeply threatening to his animal instincts. Within 6 hours of our discovery at the coordinates, our investigation was terminated by federal authorities who arrived without warning and assumed complete control of the scene. The agents who took over were unlike any federal law enforcement personnel I had encountered in 20 years of police work. They displayed no identification beyond generic credentials, refused to specify which agency they represented, and demonstrated knowledge of our investigation that suggested they had been monitoring our activities from the beginning. The lead agent, who identified himself only as Agent Smith, was approximately 40 years old, 6 feet tall, with an athletic build and prematurely gray hair. He spoke with no discernible accent and displayed a level of authority that suggested high-level federal connections. Agent Smith informed Captain Rodriguez that the Chen case was now classified under national security provisions and that all local law enforcement personnel were to cease any further investigation immediately. The federal team moved with efficiency that indicated extensive experience with similar situations. They established a perimeter around the discovery site, brought in specialized equipment that I didn't recognize, and began what appeared to be a comprehensive evidence collection operation. When I attempted to observe their activities, I was firmly but politely escorted away from the area and informed that my presence was no longer required or welcome. All physical evidence we had collected was confiscated, including soil samples, photographs, audio recordings, and written reports. The federal team also confiscated our personal notes, camera equipment, and any electronic devices that had been present at either search site. We were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that prohibited us from discussing any aspect of the investigation with anyone, including other law enforcement personnel, family members, or media representatives. Captain Rodriguez was ordered to close the case officially and list Agent Chun as missing, presumed dead due to unknown circumstances in the desert. The official report, written by federal personnel, attributed Chun's disappearance to possible cartel involvement and equipment failure during a routine surveillance operation. No mention was made of the strange evidence we had discovered, the electromagnetic anomalies, or the unusual circumstances surrounding the investigation. When I attempted to protest the handling of the case and express concerns about the incomplete investigation, Agent Smith took me aside for a private conversation that I will never forget. He explained, in terms that left no room for misunderstanding, that pursuing the matter further would be considered a serious breach of national security. He suggested that my career, my pension, and my personal safety could all be jeopardized if I failed to accept the official conclusion of the case. Despite the federal warnings and the official closure of the case, I could not abandon my search for the truth about Agent Chun's disappearance. Chun had been more than just a fellow law enforcement officer. She had been a friend, a colleague I respected and trusted. I owed her more than accepting a convenient explanation that ignored the evidence we had discovered. Using my vacation time and personal resources, I began conducting my own investigation into what had happened in the desert. My first step was to research similar cases, looking for patterns that might explain the strange circumstances surrounding Chun's disappearance. What I discovered was far more disturbing than I had anticipated. Over the past decade, 17 federal law enforcement officers had vanished under circumstances that were remarkably similar to Chun's case. All had been working cases involving drug trafficking, border security, or organized crime. All had disappeared in remote desert locations across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. The official explanations for these disappearances varied: cartel, violence, equipment failure, environmental hazards, and personal problems. But when I examined the details of each case, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Each disappearance had occurred in areas where witnesses reported unusual lights in the sky. Each investigation had been terminated by federal authorities and classified under national security provisions. Each case had involved electromagnetic anomalies that affected equipment and communications. I created a detailed database of these cases, mapping locations, dates, and circumstances. The pattern that emerged suggested a systematic operation, targeting law enforcement personnel who were working in specific geographic areas. The disappearances were not random. They followed a clear progression that indicated planning and coordination by an intelligence that understood law enforcement procedures and capabilities. My research also revealed that the federal response to these cases was always identical: immediate classification, evidence confiscation, and orders to cease investigation. The agents who took over these cases were consistently described as professional but secretive, displaying authority that suggested high-level government connections but refusing to identify their specific agency or mission. This consistency suggested that a single organization was responsible for managing all of these cases. The most troubling discovery was that several of the missing officers had attempted to contact colleagues or family members before their disappearances, reporting strange experiences and expressing concerns about their safety. These communications had been dismissed as stress-related or ignored entirely, but when viewed as part of a larger pattern, they suggested that the officers had become aware of something that made them targets for removal. My investigation led me to contact retired federal agents, former military personnel, and researchers who had studied unexplained phenomena in the southwestern United States. Through these contacts, I learned about rumors and theories that had circulated for decades among people who worked in desert regions. These stories spoke of underground facilities, advanced technology, and activities that were kept secret from the general public and most government agencies. Dr. Michael Harrison, a retired Air Force colonel who had worked on classified projects at nearby military installations, agreed to meet with me privately to discuss my findings. Dr. Harrison had spent 30 years in military intelligence and had clearance levels that gave him access to information that most people never knew existed. What he told me during our meeting fundamentally changed my understanding of what was happening in the Arizona desert. According to Dr. Harrison, there had been reports of unusual activity in the Sonoran Desert dating back to the 1940s. Military personnel, government researchers, and civilian contractors had reported encounters with technology and entities that appeared to be non-human in origin. These reports had been consistently classified and suppressed, but they had never stopped coming. Over the decades, a pattern had emerged that suggested ongoing operations by an intelligence that possessed capabilities far beyond current human technology. Dr. Harrison explained that certain areas of the desert had been designated as restricted zones, officially for military training and weapons testing, but actually to prevent civilian access to locations where unusual activity had been reported. These restrictions were enforced by agencies that operated outside normal military and law enforcement channels, using authority that derived from classified national security directives that dated back to the early Cold War period. The most significant revelation from my conversation with Dr. Harrison was his confirmation that law enforcement personnel who encountered evidence of these activities were systematically removed from their positions or eliminated entirely. This removal process was carried out by specialized teams that had been operating for decades, using cover stories and official explanations that prevented public awareness of the true situation. The goal was to maintain absolute secrecy about activities that could not be explained within the framework of conventional understanding. Dr. Harrison warned me that my investigation had almost certainly attracted the attention of these teams, and that I was in serious danger. He advised me to cease my research immediately and accept the official explanation for Chun's disappearance. When I refused, he provided me with contact information for other individuals who might be able to help me understand what I was facing. But he made it clear that he could not provide any further assistance without jeopardizing his own safety. 3 weeks after my meeting with Dr. Harrison, I received an encrypted email message that would change everything I thought I knew about Agent Chun's disappearance. The message appeared in my personal email account, which I had not used for any aspect of my investigation. The sender was identified only as a series of random numbers and letters, but the content of the message demonstrated knowledge of details about Chun's case that only someone with direct involvement could have possessed. The message contained precise coordinates for a meeting location, along with specific instructions about when and how to arrive. The location was an abandoned gas station 40 miles northeast of Phoenix, in an area that had been closed to public access for over a decade due to environmental contamination. The meeting was scheduled for midnight on a night when weather forecasts predicted heavy cloud cover that would eliminate natural lighting from the moon and stars. Against every instinct developed through 20 years of police work, I decided to attend the meeting. I armed myself with my service weapon and a backup pistol, carried emergency communication equipment, and left detailed instructions with a trusted colleague about my whereabouts and planned return time. I also prepared a sealed envelope containing copies of all my research to be opened if I failed to return within 24 hours. The drive to the meeting location took me through increasingly remote desert terrain, following roads that showed little evidence of recent use. The abandoned gas station was exactly as described, a decaying structure surrounded by rusted fuel pumps and debris from decades of neglect. I arrived 15 minutes early and positioned myself where I could observe the entire area while remaining concealed behind my vehicle. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows near the abandoned building. Even in the darkness, I could see that it was a woman of approximately Agent Chun's height and build. As she moved closer, I realized with shock that it was Chun herself, but something was fundamentally wrong with her appearance and movement. She walked with a mechanical precision that was unlike her normal gait, and her eyes reflected light in a way that reminded me of nocturnal animals. When she spoke, it was Chun's voice, but the speech patterns and vocabulary were subtly different from what I remembered. She addressed me by name and demonstrated detailed knowledge of my investigation, including activities that I had conducted in complete secrecy. Most disturbing of all, she seemed to know things about my personal life and background that even close friends and colleagues did not know. The entity that appeared to be Agent Chun explained that the real Sarah Chun was gone, taken by beings that had been conducting research operations in the desert for over 50 years. These beings were not from Earth, she told me, but from a location that existed outside our normal understanding of space and time. They had been studying human behavior, capabilities, and social structures as part of a long-term project that had implications for the future of both species. According to the Chen entity, law enforcement officers made ideal research subjects because of their training, physical conditioning, and detailed knowledge of human society and government structures. The beings had been systematically collecting such individuals for decades, always careful to select targets whose disappearances could be explained through conventional means. The goal was to gather information while avoiding detection by human authorities who might interfere with their research. The entity explained that it had been created using Chun's memories, personality patterns, and physical appearance, but that it was not human. It described itself as a construct designed to interact with human society and gather additional information that could not be obtained through direct observation. The real Chun along with the other missing law enforcement officers, was being held at an underground facility where detailed studies were being conducted on human psychology, physiology, and social behavior. What made this revelation particularly disturbing was the entity's explanation of how long these operations had been ongoing. According to its account, the beings had been present on Earth for centuries, but their activities had intensified dramatically following the development of nuclear weapons and space exploration technology. They viewed humanity as a species that was approaching a critical point in its development, and they needed to understand human capabilities and intentions before making decisions about future contact. The Chen entity told me that my investigation had attracted attention because it threatened to expose activities that needed to remain secret until the beings completed their research and made their final determinations about humanity's future. The systematic removal of law enforcement personnel who discovered evidence of their operations was a necessary security measure that protected both species from premature contact that could have catastrophic consequences. Most chilling of all was the entity's explanation that the beings had infiltrated human society at multiple levels, placing constructs like itself in positions where they could monitor and influence human activities. These infiltrations included government agencies, military organizations, and law enforcement departments. The federal agents who had taken over Chun's case were not human, according to the entity, but constructs designed to manage situations that threatened to expose the ongoing research operations. Asterisk, the Chen entity warned me that my continued investigation had marked me for collection by the beings conducting the research operations. It explained that I had gathered too much information and made too many connections to be allowed to remain free in human society. The beings had been monitoring my activities since the beginning of my investigation, and they had determined that I posed an unacceptable risk to the security of their operations. According to the entity, I had perhaps 24 hours before collection teams would be dispatched to bring me to the underground facility where the real Chun and the other missing officers were being held. Once there, I would become a research subject myself, and my disappearance would be explained through the same methods that had been used for the others. The official report would likely attribute my disappearance to stress-related breakdown, personal problems, or involvement in criminal activity. The entity provided me with a small metallic device that it claimed would mask my electromagnetic signature and make me more difficult to track using the advanced technology employed by the beings. The device was approximately the size of a coin, with a surface that seemed to shift between different metallic colors depending on the angle of observation. It felt warm to the touch and seemed to vibrate with an almost imperceptible frequency that I could feel rather than hear. Instructions for using the device were simple. Keep it in direct contact with my skin at all times. Avoid using any electronic communication devices, and change my location frequently to prevent the beings from establishing a tracking pattern. The entity warned me that the device would only provide temporary protection and that my only hope for long-term survival was to leave Arizona immediately and never return. As the entity spoke, lights appeared in the distance, moving toward our location with the same impossible speed and maneuverability that rancher Jim Hawkins had described. The Chen entity's expression changed to one of genuine fear, the first truly human emotion I had seen it display. It told me that the beings had discovered our meeting and that I needed to escape immediately. The entity itself, it explained, would be destroyed for providing me with information and assistance. I ran to my truck as the lights grew brighter and closer, the metallic device clutched in my hand. Behind me, I heard sounds that no human throat could produce, high-pitched harmonics, mixed with subsonic vibrations that seemed to resonate in my bones. I started the engine and drove through the desert night, not stopping until I had crossed the California border and put hundreds of miles between myself and whatever was happening at that abandoned gas station. Asterisk, for the past 3 months, I have been living as a fugitive, moving from town to town across the western United States, never staying in any location for more than a few days. The metallic device provided by the Chen entity appears to be effective. I have not seen the strange lights since that night at the gas station, and I have detected no signs of pursuit or surveillance. However, I know that my situation is temporary, and that my pursuers possess resources and capabilities that far exceed my ability to evade them indefinitely. I have changed my appearance significantly, cutting my hair short and dyeing it gray, growing a beard, and wearing glasses with non-prescription lenses. I use only cash for all transactions, avoid security cameras whenever possible, and never use credit cards, cell phones, or any other electronic devices that could be used to track my location. I sleep in my truck or in cheap motels that don't require identification, and I move constantly to avoid establishing any pattern that could be detected. The isolation has been the most difficult aspect of my situation. I cannot contact my family, friends, or colleagues without potentially exposing them to danger or revealing my location to my pursuers. I have watched news reports about my disappearance, which the Phoenix Police Department has attributed to stress-related breakdown and possible involvement in criminal activity. The official story is that I became obsessed with conspiracy theories following Agent Chun's disappearance and eventually suffered a complete psychological collapse. My former colleagues have been interviewed by federal agents who have painted me as an unstable individual who became fixated on bizarre explanations for routine law enforcement incidents. Captain Rodriguez has been quoted as saying that my behavior became increasingly erratic following Chun's disappearance and that she had been considering recommending psychological evaluation before I vanished. These statements, while hurtful, are probably necessary to protect my former colleagues from the same fate that has befallen me. I have attempted to contact other law enforcement agencies and government officials to report what I have learned, but my warnings have been dismissed as the ravings of a mentally unstable former police officer. The few individuals who have been willing to listen have been visited by federal agents shortly after our conversations, and they have subsequently refused to have any further contact with me. It has become clear that the beings and their human collaborators have extensive resources for monitoring and controlling information that threatens their operations. The most frustrating aspect of my situation is the knowledge that the beings continue their research operations while I remain powerless to warn others or prevent additional disappearances. I have monitored news reports and law enforcement communications, and I have identified at least 3 additional cases that appear to follow the same pattern as Chun's disappearance. Each time, I have attempted to warn the investigating agencies, but my communications have been ignored or dismissed as hoaxes. Over the past week, I have noticed that the metallic device provided by the Chen entity is beginning to malfunction. The warm vibration that I had felt continuously since that night at the gas station has become intermittent, and the device's surface no longer shifts colors as it did originally. Most concerning of all, I have begun to see the lights again, distant but unmistakable, appearing in my peripheral vision and disappearing when I try to focus on them directly. Last night, while staying at a motel outside Flagstaff, I observed 3 lights moving in formation across the sky above the town. They maintained the same precise spacing and coordination that Hawkins had described, and they moved with the same impossible speed and maneuverability that defied conventional aircraft capabilities. The lights circled the motel several times before disappearing, but I knew they had detected my presence and that my time was running out. I left Flagstaff immediately, driving through the night toward Utah, but I know that running is no longer a viable option. The device that has protected me for 3 months is failing, and I have no way to repair or replace it. The beings who have been searching for me are closing in, and it is only a matter of time before they locate me and complete their collection operation. This recording represents my final attempt to ensure that the truth about Agent Chun's disappearance and the ongoing operations in the Arizona desert is preserved for future investigators who might be better equipped to deal with these revelations. I have uploaded copies of this testimony to multiple online platforms using public computers, and I have mailed physical copies to news organizations and government agencies across the country. Whether these efforts will be successful in exposing the truth or will be suppressed like all previous attempts remains to be seen. I want to make it clear that I am not mentally ill, despite what the official reports may claim. I am a trained law enforcement professional with 20 years of experience, investigating complex cases and evaluating evidence. Everything I have reported in this testimony is based on direct observation, physical evidence, and reliable witness accounts. The beings operating in the Arizona desert are real. Their technology is far advanced beyond our current capabilities, and their research operations represent a potential threat to human society that must be addressed by authorities with the resources and authority to take appropriate action. As I prepare this final chapter of my testimony, I can see the lights approaching in the distance. They are no longer trying to remain hidden or avoid detection. 3 bright objects moving in perfect formation, heading directly toward my current location with the purposeful movement of hunters who have finally cornered their prey. The metallic device has gone completely cold and dark, its protective capabilities exhausted after 3 months of continuous operation. I want to use these final minutes to provide a complete summary of what I have learned about the beings and their operations, in the hope that future investigators will be able to use this information to protect other law enforcement personnel and expose the truth about what is happening in our desert regions. The beings are not visitors in the conventional sense. They have been present on Earth for an extended period, possibly centuries, conducting long-term research on human development and capabilities. Their technology is based on principles that we do not currently understand, allowing them to manipulate electromagnetic fields, gravity, and possibly time itself. They can create constructs that are virtually indistinguishable from human beings, infiltrate our society at the highest levels, and monitor our activities without detection by conventional means. Their underground facilities are located throughout the southwestern United States, hidden beneath areas that have been designated as restricted military zones or environmental protection areas. The systematic collection of law enforcement personnel serves multiple purposes. It provides them with detailed information about human society and government structures. It eliminates potential threats to their security, and it supplies them with research subjects who possess the training and knowledge they need to understand human capabilities. The missing officers are not dead. They are being held at underground facilities where they are subjected to detailed study of their psychology, physiology, and social behavior. The federal agents who manage the cover-up operations are not human, but are constructs created by the beings to interface with human society and maintain the secrecy necessary for their research operations. These constructs have been placed in positions throughout government agencies, military organizations, and law enforcement departments, where they can monitor human activities and suppress any evidence that threatens to expose the being's presence. The ultimate goal of these operations remains unclear, but the beings appear to be preparing for some form of future contact with humanity. Their research suggests that they are evaluating our species to determine whether we represent a threat, an opportunity, or something else entirely. The decisions they make based on their research could have profound implications for the future of human civilization. The lights are now directly overhead, and I can feel the same electromagnetic effects that we experienced during our search for Agent Chen. My watch has stopped, my truck's engine has died, and the air itself seems to be charged with an energy that makes my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. I know that within minutes, I will join Chun and the other missing officers at whatever facility the beings use for their research operations. To anyone who finds this recording, I want to emphasize that the threat is real and ongoing. The beings continue their operations, and more law enforcement personnel will disappear unless action is taken to expose and stop their activities. Do not trust federal agents who arrive to take over cases involving unexplained disappearances in desert regions. Do not accept official explanations that ignore physical evidence and witness testimony. Do not allow the truth to be suppressed by classification and cover-up operations. If you are a law enforcement officer working in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, or other southwestern states, be aware that certain areas of the desert are under surveillance by non-human entities with advanced technology. If you encounter electromagnetic anomalies, strange lights, or metallic residue at crime scenes, do not investigate further without backup and support from agencies that are not compromised by the being's infiltration operations. Most importantly, remember that the missing officers are not dead. Sarah Chun, along with 17 other federal agents, is being held at an underground facility where she is being subjected to research operations by beings whose intentions remain unclear. Any rescue operation would require resources and capabilities that exceed those of conventional law enforcement, but the possibility of rescue should not be abandoned. This is Detective Marcus Kane, badge number 4471, Phoenix Police Department, making my final report. The lights are descending now, and I can see shapes moving within them that are definitely not human. I can hear the same vocalizations that we detected in Chun's transmission, sounds that seem to bypass normal hearing and resonate directly in my consciousness. Whatever happens to me in the next few minutes, I want the record to show that I maintained my oath to protect and serve until the very end. Remember, Sarah Chun, remember the truth. Remember that we are not alone in the universe, and that the beings who share our world have their own agenda that may not align with human interests. Stay away from the desert. Trust no one who claims to represent federal authority without proper identification and verification. And whatever you do, never stop searching for the truth, no matter how impossible or frightening that truth might be. The lights are landing now. I can see figures approaching my truck, tall and thin with movements that are too fluid to be human. This is Detective Marcus Kane, signing off for the final time. May God help us all, and may someone with the courage and resources to act on this information find it before it's too late. End of transmission.